This is the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast.
Exclusively on the Herd App Media Network.
Tell it to me straight up.
Hello, and welcome into the Straight Up Breakdown Podcast, proudly part of the Hail Varsity Network. I am Greg Smith, it's somehow Christmas week, and I barely noticed because I've been too busy praying. I keep having to look at this calendar to remind myself that Christmas is this week. Joining me today is Jackson State athletics beat writer for the Clarion Ledger, Khari Thompson. Khari, thank you for being on the show, man. How are you?
No problem, man. I'm good. It's been a long week, but a good week for sure.
Yeah, there is all sorts of things that I want to get into with you because, like you said, there's been a long week because y'all had a lot of stuff going on this week. But, boy, there's been a lot of stuff that has happened since you really have taken over the beat. We will get to that in a second. But first, I want to hit a little bit of national news in college football. As you guys know, listening to the show, we have a couple of segments that are mainstays of the show, and the first one is called Coach Speak, where we go over something that a coach, player, or talking head said, and then we give you the straight-up breakdown of what they meant.
Coach Speak to Real Talk.
Now, this week comes courtesy of Heisman winner from Alabama, Bryce Young. Now, the Heisman ceremony obviously happened a couple of weeks ago, but there was no pod last week. I wanted to talk about this, but it worked out perfectly to be able to talk about it this week, too. Bryce had this to say during his Heisman speech, quote, "For me, I've always been somebody who's been labeled as not the prototype," Young said. "Being a black quarterback and being, quote, undersized and not being that prototype, I've always been ruled out and kind of doubted. People a lot of times have told me that I wasn't going to be able to make it. And for me, it's always been about not really proving them wrong, but proving myself of what I can accomplish." So, Khari, what does he mean by that?
Let's break that down.
I don't know. I mean, Bryce, I guess there's adversity as a black quarterback these days, but if you look at the NFL, aren't we really going through a black quarterback renaissance? Like, look at all the black quarterbacks. I mean, you got Russ, you got Kyler Murray, you know what I'm saying? Like, you got, who am I missing? There's like Pat four, Mahomes, five,
Mahomes,
six. You got Teddy Bridgewater just came out the hospital. Like, I mean, there's so many black quarterbacks in the NFL nowadays. I'm not taking away from what Bryce Young is saying, but maybe he needed to use that as internal motivation. Maybe that's what gets him going. And if that is, that's a good thing because we all have to use what we think gets us going through this situation.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me on this one, too, because I didn't like, and I agreed with you. That was my first thought when I saw that about just like in thinking about all of the black quarterbacks. And I totally agree. It's a black quarterback renaissance right now. And how you know is you're starting to have like career black backup quarterbacks now. Whereas what you never used to see that, like you had to be like ice cold to be able to out there playing, but then you also would not be able to be a backup. And you're starting to see that start to happen more and more. So I do think that that's changing, but I found it interesting what he said about kind of being doubted, because I feel like I saw a lot of conversation on social media about that because, of course, I think he was the number one quarterback recruit in his class coming out that year out of California. And so people were like, okay, how doubted were you really?
Right.
And I get that. I do understand that. But at the same time, like he is a smaller quarterback. And he's one of those kids, because we're in this kind of era of kids transferring even in high school, where he transferred high schools during his career as well. And so he kind of had that. I think that, of course, like any top athlete, like he had adversity to face and he had things to overcome. But I think the right word was to just to say people were haters. Like instead of doubters, like we're really talking about haters versus doubters in this case.
Look, there's always going to be people who have something to say about anybody. You know, there's always going to be that one person who you're too short for, or who they don't like your measurables. But I mean, dude, Bryce Young, listen, take it for someone who's a high school sports reporter this time last year, right? And constantly on the site Max Preps, right? You know how they have those videos that just play on auto repeat and they talk about those players? There was two names that I had burned into my head during my time as a high school sports reporter: Bryce Young and DJ Uiagalelei. Yes. I only know how to say that because I've been hearing their names so much as a high school sports reporter.
Yeah, that's funny you say that because as I in my like a regular job for HailVarsity.com, I do cover Nebraska recruiting, right? And so I'm always on Max Preps all the time, and so those names were there all the time, like
Right.
all the time. And so is the other. Now I've almost been blocked him out. But it was the defensive lineman that went to Clemson about that same time. Brian Brees, I think was his name.
Yeah.
He was always on highlights as well. Yeah, it's just interesting how that kind of goes. Is that even when you cover something totally different than like wherever those kids ended up, like there are always a handful of national recruits that you just can't escape. Like no matter who you cover, you cannot escape them.
Real ones know, man. Real ones put in the Max Trucks hours, man. Real ones know.
Yeah, the Mac Trucks hours where you hope that a team is out here updating stats. Those are tough days.
Schedules too.
Oh, the schedules, yes, yeah. We had the it's funny, it's not baseball here. We have a thing here where we just don't look at Max Prep schedules. They have like individual conference schedules for the schools that we can kind of go to because we learned not to go on Max Preps. Don't go on the school website because most of the time those are updated. Like there's all sorts of stuff. Like people. I think one of the real tough things about covering high school sports is just all of the scheduling, and that's just for football. Like did you cover outside of football or did you cover basketball?
Oh yeah, I did every sport.
Oh yeah, that had to be hell
on my own.
Yeah, that had to be rough. So okay, so that's perfect segue then because what I really wanted to talk to you about, and as I introduced off the top, is that you know the Jackson State athletics beat writer for the Clarion Ledger, and so I guess I want to start here because it feels like it has not been very long since you had the job. Like, how long have you been on that beat?
So my first game was the Mississippi Valley State game. I jumped in mid-season.
Okay, so you
really at the end of the season,
right? Like towards the end of the season, you jumped in. And I feel like since that happened, I don't know for you if this has been good, bad, hectic, or what, but I feel like there have been just any number of newsworthy things that have happened in Jackson State since you've been just covering the football team alone. Like run us through like kind of what this has been like for you and like the big headlines that have happened with Jackson State since you've been part of the beat.
So I think the first couple of weeks of the beat, I was actually covering high school sports in Memphis during the week and driving down to Jackson on the weekends, just because it's so close. And, I was helping transition until they replaced me in Memphis.
Sure.
So it's been crazy. I'm still like not all the way moved. I have a place in Jackson, but I'm not like my couch isn't here or anything like that.
Okay.
So it's gotten real. So literally just jumping into one of the biggest sports stories in the nation. I mean, you jump in and Coach Prime's in the hospital and we don't know what's going on with him. You jump in and there's reports out of the Dallas area that he's interviewing with TCU. You jump in and there's the drama of his return and him coming back in the Southern game and then scoring 21 points and Shador getting the game-winning touchdown and Shiloh clinching it with an interception. And then you jump in and they win the SWAC title. And then they head to Atlanta where they have all the hype. They sign Travis Hunter, the number one recruit in the country. Everybody's talking about Jackson State. Everybody's talking about Deion Sanders returning to Atlanta. And then they get stopped.
Right.
31-10 loss. Symbolic that they lost by 21. We know how special that number is to Coach Prime.
Right.
Wild that they lost by that number. And there you go, man. Here we are.
Yeah, it's just been so many things. And I think I've mentioned this on the pod before. Like I have a special connection to Jackson State because my dad went to undergrad at Jackson State. And I have told you on Twitter before that he reads you. And so it's always interesting to me. And I've been hearing about since the day that they hired Coach Prime, he has been excited for all of this. Like this has basically gone as well as it could possibly have gone, right? Over this stretch of time. And so this season has just been so interesting because it's been building and like you said, kind of the biggest story in college football. And then it kind of culminated in last week where you have Travis Hunter like flip on signing day from Florida State to Jackson State, and then you have the big game in Atlanta, and then they lay the egg in the big game. And I feel like, and this was not surprising at all, that there were a lot of people waiting to be like, oh, well, you see, this is why they shouldn't got so much attention, or this is why the kids shouldn't go there or whatever because of the one loss, which we knew was going to happen. That was ridiculous, and it was going to happen. But I want to make special mention of Travis Hunter making that move, which is such an enormous move, because for me personally, that day is so filled with all, like, for me, Nebraska news and everything that's happening with them, and it still was that. But really, the other thing that anybody could talk about was Travis Hunter flipping to Jackson State. Like, everyone was talking about that. So what was that like from your perspective to see that happening? Like, when did you kind of get wind of that? And what did that kind of end up doing to your day once that went down?
So I knew something was up when Barstool tweeted the day before that clip of Coach Prime basically saying, we have something that's going to get every single media outlet's attention on signing day. Like, he called a shot. He said it the night before. So it wasn't like Coach Prime went into this without, like, I literally wrote a piece about how Deion Sanders says something is up. Right. It was just a question of what it was. And then the wheels start turning your head. Travis Hunter was here for the Alcorn game where Jackson State drew nearly 60,000 fans for an official visit. And then you're like, nah, can't be. Number one recruit in the country, longtime commit to Florida State. Kids just don't make those types of decisions. Lo and behold, 247 Sports, goes on and says that Jackson State is in a good position to land them. And then it's like, holy smokes, this is real. And then obviously he has the formal announcement. And to answer your question, what it did to my day, that was the day before I was supposed to fly out to Atlanta. So I thought I was going to have a nice chill off day, update the list, talk about a couple of players, what to expect for a couple of players that Jackson State added. You know those lists where you kind of just, here's player X and this is what you can expect this year. Nah, man. It was right about Travis Hunter time.
Yeah, and which is really interesting because then I had to, because I obviously, and we talk about how of like a handful of national recruits, even if that person is not going to the school that you cover. So I knew about him. I knew he was number one recruit. And so I'm also like pulling away from what I'm doing to then kind of watch clips of him and like see. I was like, okay, so I was like, I know he played wide out. I didn't realize until I went and did that research that he played both ways. I see all the clips of him doing like everything you could possibly want on the field. Then I see the ceremony of the official announcement, which was my favorite part of the day. Yes. I just loved it. And I always
the fact that he threw the hats.
Yes, the fact that he threw the hats was top notch for me. And I like that he actually, the statement that he put out to go along with that, to talk about the history of players selected HBCUs, I thought was great as well. And his opportunity to really do something different. I just think that it all, to me, came to be a perfect storm in a good way to then also continue to shine spotlight on HBCUs, but also, and this was also another thing of things that were bound to happen. This was bound to happen where you had idiots coming out of the woodwork, aka Doug Gottlieb, that were out here like, okay, well, why would somebody go there, not realizing, like, I just feel like people say stuff like that, especially particularly about HBCUs, without understanding A, why we really needed HBCUs to begin with, and B, how successful the schools have been in producing elite NFL players. Like, it's not like it has never happened before.
Right. I mean, I wrote a piece this week highlighting the fact that Jackson State University and Florida State University have produced the same amount of Pro Football Hall of Famers in their football histories, which is 4.
Right.
So if you think about it, everyone's like, why didn't he pick Florida State? Florida State has the stadium, and yet they have all the amenities and they have the money, and they're this major school. Jackson State has a major history as a football powerhouse. It's just that there's been a lull. It's been a downtime, an extended downtime at that. But, you look in the 70s, in the 60s, Jackson State was churning them out, putting players in the NFL. And they've put players in the NFL between now and then, but obviously players have kind of started to overlook them a little bit. But I think Coach Prime's starting to bring some of that back. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, it will be interesting to me just to see the continued spread of the influence of this, because I think, but the thing is it doesn't, and it's great that Travis Hunter did this, in my opinion, in that he is being the number one kid to do it, but you really actually, in my opinion, don't need the top guy to make these choices, to continue to raise and elevate the level of football and continue to bring awareness and to continue to make it to where it's a desirable place for guys to go. You just need quality players to continue to think that it's an option, to take a look at it and then say, oh, okay, well, they have everything I need to be successful is at these schools too. I don't have to go I don't even want to say traditional route is not the way I want to say it, but I don't have to go the way that is more conventional now that people think of. I think there were a lot of kids, and again, this is how I can kind of tell this just because of how many different high school recruits I have to follow on Twitter to keep up with what's happening. I keep them in a list and all of this. There were a lot of kids that were talking about Jackson State, that were talking about HBCUs. I actually noticed, though, that more kids at least had HBCUs in their Final Five. And in some cases, top threes. I saw a lot more of that. And I think that there is something building with that. And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be like all of the top players. It just needs to be a known option for kids.
Right. I'd agree with that as an HBCU grad. However, we are talking about Deion Sanders here, and he is not one that tries to do anything average or mediocre. He is one that is going to swing. It's prime time. He tries to make prime time moves. Right. And he made a prime time move. I mean, how poetic is it? Think about it. This kid is a cornerback going to play for Deion Sanders, who was committed to Florida State, Deion Sanders' alma mater, and decides to go play for the man himself to represent an HBCU. How much more powerful can that symbolism get? Especially when you hear Deion on ESPN talking about basically how Travis studied who Coach Prime is and was as prime time, to the point where they've talked about how much they both are quote unquote from the hood and love fishing. I mean, it's the little things like that they've bonded over. And that's why it's just so interesting that he made this move. And so interesting that there's so many people saying, oh, it must have been because of the money. Because I don't know. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, there's so many people saying that Travis Hunter went to Jackson State because of money or a rumored NIL deal, which with Barstool, which Deion has denied, Coach Prime has denied. My question to those folks are, so did Florida State really get outbid by little old Jackson State? Did Jackson State scrape up more money? You know what I'm saying? Would even if he did have a deal with Barstool, which I've been told by a JSU source that it doesn't, at least yet. Okay. Even if he did have one, he couldn't get it at any other school that he picked. It was contingent on him going to Jackson State. Come on, man. I mean, this kid is such a high caliber recruit. He's going to get paid no matter where he goes, right, under these rules. He could pick wherever and get paid.
Yeah, and that was my first thought too, is that, okay, so if you want to say that he only went there because of the money, that is right. What's right is you're saying then that Jackson State outbid Florida State, which if you it's just crazy. But they not only outbid Florida State, they also outbid Georgia, right? Because Georgia was in the mix, right? He threw their hat too. So what? It just doesn't make sense. And I think that it's one of those things where people are just searching for reasons beyond what he actually said and beyond the relationship. And I also think that people did not realize until maybe later in the day or the next day, kind of the relationship that had developed between Travis and Coach Prime, and that how much Travis had studied him, because I was reading more about that stuff later on in the day about how, wait a second, we maybe should have, like, I don't know, seeing this coming is too strong because you just don't ever see that particular set of circumstances, but we should have maybe thought it was at least a possibility based on some of the stuff in Travis's background and how much he revered Coach Prime and all of that. And so it was just interesting. Like, I just found the whole thing to be a really fascinating story, and something that obviously people are going to continue to be, paying attention to, and it'll continue to be a big thing. And I wonder too, from your point of view, as you saw like attendance continue to rise, and I know JSU outdrew a lot of teams going throughout this season. They had so much interest in all of that. Is there any danger of that waning or falling off at all at this point, or does it just continue to pick up and take off from where it is?
I think it's going to continue to take off because, like, you've added the number one recruit in the country to the mix. Who's not, like, dude, if you're in Jackson, Mississippi and you're bored on a Saturday, you have the opportunity to go see a 5-star kid like Travis Hunter play every single day, every single week, who's been compared to like a Charles Woodson type, or maybe even Deion Sanders type. Like, I mean, I know this is hype for a high school kid, but I mean, it's pretty lofty comparisons. I think what's unique and why Coach Prime was so smart to pick Jackson State is that Jackson State is one of the few HBCUs with the infrastructure to do this. Like, I went to an HBCU. I went to Hampton. Hampton on its best day could not do what Jackson State is doing right now, because Hampton Stadium only seats like 17,000. So even if you have a sellout, it's like 17,000 people.
Right.
A lot of schools in the SWAC are the same way. You look at Mississippi Valley, same way. Bethune, same way. There's really only a few HBCUs that could do this. Jackson State is like one of the few, along with like maybe Tennessee State, North Carolina A&T, and like FAMU. Maybe Southern, we can throw Southern in the borderline.
Okay.
But after that, there's not too many HBCUs with the capabilities of playing in a 60,000 seat stadium.
Yeah, and that's definitely, and that's part of him creating kind of prime time and creating that excitement, right? I guess different with 60,000 in there versus 17,000, which is definitely, it makes another kind of subplot of all of this. Because I saw the thing where was it the Ole Miss band that came down for the game?
Walker Sturgeon.
Yes, yeah. And like even being able to do things like that and have people come down and check it out. It's just fascinating to me, and it's so many things have to come together all in the right mix to do this, right? Like, you have to have the right coach, and obviously they do, with the right personality, but then also you have to be winning. You also have to have a little bit of style points to that as well. Like, it's just all coming together for them to then see them capitalize on it immediately to land Travis Hunter. And there's a couple other recruits too that are in that group. They had a couple transfers too. That'll be really interesting too. And so it's just the thing, it's cooking, and it'll be real fun to see kind of how it continues to evolve down there. And I know that the thing though, that everyone that I've talked to about this up here, they always kind of add the caveat, yeah, but we'll see how long, Coach Prime stays down there. And that's the last thing on this topic I want to get your take on. Like, what do you think when you hear people say that? Because I find it, I don't want to poison the well. I don't want to lead you. What do you think when you hear people say that?
I just have a question. I have a question, and my question is simple. And there's some people who are going to give me simple answers, but I think it's a little more complex than they would say. Because my question would be, what could a Power 5 program realistically do for Deion Sanders that he can't do at Jackson State? Right? Like, and so a lot of people are going to say money. A lot of people will be like, well, he can make $10 million a year somewhere if he picks the right school. Which is true. We all like money. Money's important. But this is a guy who's played in the NFL and the MLB right. and still has endorsement deals. He said it. He said it on ESPN. Like, the money's not going to change his lifestyle, right? So if he spent all this time talking about what he views as a calling to uplift HBCUs, for him to get pried away by money would look very. It wouldn't be a great look for him. Like, just as a person, it just wouldn't be a great look for him. The other thing that a lot of people are going to bring up, well, he can't win a national championship, right? What if he leads FSU to a national championship? My take on that is this dude has won 2 Super Bowls. I mean, this dude has hit MLB home run and scored an NFL touchdown the same week. He's lived his life. He's won the big games already. He's been involved in much bigger things in the CFP, which a lot of FBS coaches, you cannot say that for. So again, what can they really do other than those things?
Yeah, and looking at it that way is such an interesting thing, because if it all comes down to what Deion wants, Coach Prime, what he really wants is, if he believes, and he has said this multiple times, that like he believes it's a calling to uplift HBCUs, and if that is his motivation and that's what he's saying, and I take him at his word, then those things won't matter. Like it really won't, unless he got to the point to where he feels like, he did his work and he got Jackson State and HBCUs to a place, but I don't know how you can even measure that. So I don't know. Like, it would have to take.
And that's not a 2, 3, 4 year process either.
No, it's really not.
If that's really what it is.
No.
So yeah, continue. My bad.
Yeah, no, you good. And so it's just like it makes it difficult to see what the situation would be, because you also have to. A part of me also wonders if you take, like, if he took, I don't know, pick a job that was open at USC. So he had taken the USC job. Like, I just feel like it also his quality of life based on where he is. Like, see, so coaches make these trade-offs to go take that pressure cooker job at USC for all of the money that it entails to chase that glory, when they haven't necessarily accomplished the things that Deion has accomplished. And so he doesn't need to necessarily do that. And we don't know that that's not, like, that chase, if that's not what drives him, then he's never going to want to take, say, USC, or, like if Michigan was open or something like that, like it just wouldn't be the same motivator that it would be to a Lincoln Riley or a Jim Harbaugh. Like, it just wouldn't be the same situation. And so I would be really curious what it would take to be able to pry him away. I just think that it would have to be a lot more than what people are thinking, even though the reports about him interviewing for the TCU job and all of that. Like, I just feel like, but even that is a more unique situation, because they had set up shop in Dallas, right? Like, they were like Dallas-Fort Worth area. Like, that's where they were at before he was at Jackson State. So that actually makes a little bit more logistical sense than just picking, Auburn, for example. Like, it just didn't, I just don't think that all of those make sense in the way that people want to just assume that they do.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think a lot of people are just assuming that he's a mercenary, that he's just a hired gun that will just go wherever and do whatever. And I don't know him. I've only asked him a couple questions over my short time here, but if you take him at his word, which obviously you have to trust but verify as a journalist. You can't just immediately take someone at his word. Sure. But he's saying that he has a calling to uplift the HBCUs. And I don't think he would take it that far. I don't think he'd be saying that publicly if there wasn't some truth to that.
Like, because you don't have to take it that far. You can just say,
you didn't have to say it.
Yeah. You can say, I really wanted to get into coaching, I always dreamed of being a head coach. I've been coaching Shador since he's little. This is my opportunity. That's what you say if you didn't feel that way, at least a little bit. Right. So if he truly feels that way, and then within a couple of years turns around and competes against the very schools that he was looking to uplift, that just looks hypocritical, honestly. Because he didn't have to say it. He didn't have to say any of that. He chose to repeatedly, and he's doubling down.
A lot, right? Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's a good place for that transition here, because I think that every week we end the show with my favorite segment of the week called Put 'em on Blast, where we basically put someone on blast for something that they did or said.
Put them on blast.
Now, as always, I like to let the guests go first. So, Khari, I'm going to let you go first. Who are you putting on blast this week?
Angry Power 5 fans who are mad about the Travis Hunter decision. No question, no hesitation. There's a lot of Power 5 fans who are telling on themselves, who really feel that they own these kids, who feel like these kids can't make any decisions on their own to attend other schools than their mainstream schools, these Power 5 FBS schools. There's always room for different decisions. There's always room for picking a place where you can feel comfortable and learn from people who have similar interests in mind, learn from institutions that have been designed for the purpose of educating you, particularly, and institutions where you don't have to be a minority. There's always room for that. I think that conversation needs to be had throughout our society, beyond just football, even down to the regular kids who are applying to college. Because even if you're a superstar student, there's still that stigma of attending an HBCU. Even if you're a 5-star student who aces the SAT, there's plenty of them who still pick these PWIs. So it's a deeper conversation than just football. I'm glad it's being raised. And I'm glad a lot of these nut jobs are being exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think that well said on all of that. I think that conversation that people can even start to have that conversation, I think is so necessary, and I think it's important. I think that conversation needs to happen, and I think that in part, just because, like I said earlier, related to the football portion of it, is that I think that kids understanding that it is an option is a good thing, and why it's an option, why it was needed. But then let's be real, there's a lot of people now. There's the segment of the angry Power 5 fan that we're never going to reach, that was just going to be angry, and you got that tinge of the ism coming out when it came to this, right? Like that, those people were never going to reach. But there are a group of people that, man, that was this season in particular of college football, and then that Travis Hunter decision was their larger exposure to HBCUs, right? And not through necessarily anything nefarious, or like they were out here like doing it on purpose. It happened. And they were willing to be open to learning, right? I think that's a key part of that. And I think that some of that goes on too. So I always like to look at those folks too, because they do exist, even though I will never say that that other large group of people also exist. They definitely deserve to be put on blast. But the whole larger conversation around all of this, like I said, is very needed and important, because I think that educating more people on all of this, I think, is always good and needed. And I think continuing to have those conversations is definitely worthwhile.
Yes, sir. Totally agree. Well said.
Now, well, the who I have to put on blast, and I can't even get it out, because I've been seeing this build over the last, it feels like a couple of weeks, right, with pro sports leagues and COVID. What is happening here? Like, I think today, I saw a headline today from USA Today where Chiefs star tight end Travis Kelce was one of 51 players that went into the COVID protocol today on Monday. We recorded on Monday to go live on Tuesday. And I was talking to someone earlier today where I feel like basically the NFL has relaxed their rules continuously in such a way to where they're basically like, hey, COVID, if we don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. the NBA comes out with this cockamamie rule about, hey, let's go ahead and have people have replacement players that they can bring in. If you lose a certain amount of your regular players, then they have to go into protocol, and those replacement players don't count against your salary cap or over your luxury tax and all of this. And I'm sitting here looking like, I feel like right now, with the way the headlines are going for sports leagues and really in the world at large, but we can do a whole separate podcast on that, is that it feels like March 2020 all over again. Like, this is what this feels like, where every hour I feel like there is another headline about so-and-so either has COVID-19 or they're going into the protocol. And I just feel like it feels like we should be going towards sports leagues pausing. But on the other hand, the reason that these sports leagues are going on blast is because I don't think they are going to pause. I think that everyone's just going to push through this, even though it continues to spread rapidly throughout these leagues. Like, I find it kind of crazy that we've just decided that we're just going to keep pushing through with these games.
Okay. So you're saying that they should, are you saying that they shut down immediately? Like, what are you saying?
I'm saying that they need to, what I think they should do is shut down now, because of the fact that there's the spread is just so much within leagues. What I think they should have done to prevent this point, though, was continued stringent testing. I thought that the lax in testing is really what led us here, because when you got to the point where you weren't testing as rigorously, so because you didn't want people to miss games, essentially, you ended up having more spread within these teams, just because naturally it's easier to spread within a sports team. So if you had bit the bullet and taken one or two guys and sat them into the protocol, instead of ignoring those run of two guys and then letting that spread, I think you would have come out in a better situation and to be able to continue playing games. I just don't know how you're going to keep running, especially in football, keep running these teams out here where, the Bears are missing most of their secondary because everybody's in the protocol.
I don't really have a strong take either way. I'm not a doctor. I was in college 5 years ago, and I'm just a meathead who writes about sports. Here's what I can say about this, though. Your point about it feeling like March 2020 again. The morning shot for me in March, the moment when it all seemed like it was all going to shut down after the Rudy Gobert thing, right, when he touched all the mics, was when the Ivy League canceled its tournament.
Yeah.
Because I remember sitting at Middle Tennessee State University in Murfreesboro, because I was covering the Tennessee State basketball championships.
Sure.
That's where I was when the world all shut down last year. We were in the girls tournament, and they made it to the semifinals, and they canceled the tournament and never played it. So there were 4 teams left, and we don't know who would have won in Tennessee. So the warning shot to me was the Ivy League. I saw the Ivy League saying we're gonna shut down the tournament and go virtual. And this week, Harvard, I pay attention to Boston stuff because I'm a Boston guy. That's where I'm from. This week, Harvard announced that it's going virtual classes. So that's kind of telling to me, because I don't know if Harvard is known for much, but they're known for research.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That is kind of their thing.
There's one thing Harvard's known for. It's doing research and doing homework and knowing what they're talking about. So if they're shutting down the campus and going virtual, I think there's some smoke where there might be fire, which is unfortunate, because who knows what the future holds for us.
Yeah, it's really tough. And I don't like it. It's just, I think it's difficult in many, many ways for a lot of people that in ways that you see and don't see, right? And I think that enduring this pandemic for now 2 years, basically, has had a lot of impact on our society, that will never be the same, right? But I do hope, and while I started off saying that I want the sports league to pause, I want them to pause ultimately so people get healthy and they can come back and finish. But also they need to be healthy. But then also I recognize that if things are trending the wrong direction, that it's going to mean a lot of bad stuff for a lot of people, because I know how difficult this has been just in talking to people. And I know those of you listening know this feeling, because it's one of those things, and we said this very early on in the pandemic, that it's one of the very rare things that it has affected all of us in some way, large, small, and like whatever. It's been a way that it's impacted your life. And so we all have those stories. And so it's just tough. I hope that something happens and we can turn the tide here. But it's going to be difficult.
Yeah. Well said, man. I agree.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for us this week. Subscribe to the podcast everywhere you listen to them. Rate us and review us. Leave us a 5-star review. If you leave 4, I'm inclined to think you're a hater and nobody wants that. Make sure you're checking out the podcast on the other podcasts on the Hail Varsity Network, the Mind Your Own podcast, Varsity Club, Nebraska Preps Postgame Show, and the Hail Varsity Radio Show. Also, check out the Hail Varsity YouTube page. I'm back on there with the recruiting question video of the week. You can also get at us on Twitter at Greg Smith HB, @_ Khari Thompson. You can also email the show at straightupbreakdown@hailvarsity.com. I will catch you guys next week.
A Huda Media Production.